Good evening. It's great to see such a great crowd. My name is Trani Grand. I'm the Associate Dean of Research and Graduate Studies in the Faculty of Arts, and I'm a member of the English Department here at the University of Regina. I'm very happy to welcome all of you to the 2019 Gordon Wicijowski Law Foundation of Saskatchewan Lecture, and I thank you all for coming. Before we begin tonight's event, I wish to acknowledge our presence here on Treaty 4 lands, the territories of the Nehiyawak, Anishinaabeg, Dakota, Lakota, and Nakota, and the homeland of the Métis. We are grateful to be here. Tonight's event is possible owing to the generous support of the Law Foundation of Saskatchewan, an organization dedicated to enhancing legal education and research in this province and responding to ongoing challenges facing the administration of justice. In 2005, the Law Foundation of Saskatchewan Chair in Police Studies was established within the University of Regina Faculty of Arts to enable our university to function as a center of excellence in police studies and to support issues of direct relevance to policing in Saskatchewan. Each year, this support enables the Law Foundation Chair in Police Studies to bring a renowned expert in the field of criminal justice to the U of R to present an annual lecture and contribute to a national conversation about policing. This is a crucial dialogue we are very pleased to continue tonight. We have been fortunate to host a renowned group of guest lecturers to this stage. Past lecturers have included Harold Sapers, Correctional Investigator of Canada, with a talk entitled Some Reflections on the Discourse of Crime and Punishment in Canada, U of T Center for Criminology and Sociology Professor Mariana Valverde with a talk entitled Beyond the Criminal Law, What Local and Provincial Authorities Can Do to Regulate Sexually Oriented Business. And last year's speaker, Michigan State University cybercrime expert Thomas J. Holt with a lecture entitled Why Do Hackers Hack? This year, we are delighted to welcome esteemed author Harold R. Johnson to deliver tonight's lecture. I will now invite Dr. Rick Riddell, Professor in the Department of Justice Studies and Law Foundation Chair in Police Studies, to introduce our speaker.
Thank you so much for coming out this evening. I'm going to make the introduction really brief. We're so happy to have Harold Johnson come with us. Like so many people from Saskatchewan, he saw a little bit of the world, made some tremendous achievements along the way, and has returned to Saskatchewan to share his knowledge with us. His book was his almost last book. I understand he's got a book launch tomorrow for a new work. But his work has changed a lot of people's perceptions about alcohol, and we'll be hearing a little bit of that tonight. So thank you again for showing up tonight.
I want to thank University of Regina for inviting me. Thank you for taking time out of your lives to come out and hear me tonight. I grew up in an Aboriginal community of trappers and fishers. And as I was growing up, I heard all of the stories of trapping and fishing. And I believed those stories and thought I could become a trapper and a fisherman. My father died when I was 8 years old, and my mother took over trapping and fishing. I was about 12 or 13, walking the trap line with her. I remember everything about that day. It was March. The snow had melted and frozen and melted and frozen, and I can remember the sound of my mother's moccasins on that snow. I remember where the sun was. It was to the southwest, high in the sky, so about 2 o'clock in the afternoon. There was a warm wind coming from that same direction. The sky was clear, mostly blue with a few wispy clouds. And my mother stopped, and she turned to me and she said, "My boy, you have to learn this. You have to learn how to trap, You have to learn how to fish. You have to learn how to make your living off the land in case anything ever happens to that other world. We don't always listen to our parents, and especially when we're 12 and 13 years old. But for some reason, that stuck. And I made sure I could live in both worlds. I'm not the best bushman. There are people with better bush skills than I have. But I can survive. And that has made all of the difference. When I worked in the mines, I could tell a foreman to piss off. Go ahead and fire me. Doesn't matter. I'm going to survive. And I was telling my wife that this ability is what gave me all of the confidence that I had, even so far as to going to Harvard. And as soon as I said it, I remembered the first thing I packed for my trip to Boston was my camping gear and my tent. When I was about 17, a man from my community came back from Cyprus in Egypt. He'd been a peacekeeper, and he told me stories of peacekeeping. And I heard those stories, and I believed them. And I could imagine myself in the Canadian Armed Forces, and at 17, I joined the Canadian Navy Maritime Command. And there I learned all of the songs, stories, and traditions. Away, away with a fife and drum, here we come, full of rum, looking for women who peddle their bum, the North Atlantic Squadron. And I took those songs and stories into myself. And I said, this is the real me. I'm a hard-working, hard-drinking sailor man. When I got out of the Navy, I came back to northern Saskatchewan. My older brothers had been loggers and miners, and I heard the stories of logging and mining. And for the next several years, my home was a bunkhouse, and everything I owned fit in a pack sack. And I helped to clear cut northern and western Canada. And I dug great big holes that we call open pit uranium mines. And I worked underground. And I told myself, I'm a hard-working, hard-drinking, tough son of a bitch, logger, miner, sailor, don't fuck with me. And I wasn't pretending. That's who I believed I was. I met a woman, got married, had children. My story changed. I became the hard-working provider, protector. If I'd have dropped my hard-ass story, my marriage might have survived. It didn't. 1991, working at the Key Lake Uranium Mine as a heavy equipment operator. And there's a story going around that says if you drive a cat or a haul truck, you're stupid. So to prove I wasn't stupid, I quit mining and went to university. Picked the hardest thing they had. I picked law. Not because I wanted to be a lawyer, I was proving a point. Harold Johnson isn't stupid. When you get a degree in anything, there's a story that says, you didn't earn that. They just gave it to you because you're an Indian. So to prove nobody gave me anything, I went to Harvard and got a master's degree in law. And for 20 years, I was stuck being a lawyer. The point of all of that, other than to introduce myself, is to show the power of story. Every time I changed the story I was telling myself, my life changed, sometimes in fundamental ways. Everything is story. I am story, you are story, the universe is story. Stories are extremely powerful. We believe in this fiction we call Canada. We just made it up. It doesn't exist. Drive an hour and a half south of here, take a look, there's no line. It's okay, it's a good story. We have a constitution, it's in writing, we wrote it. We could have written anything we wanted. It's okay, it works, but it's just a story. We used to believe in unicorns and dragons. Now we believe in market forces. We believe in an economy. We believe in money. If you have any in your wallet, take it out and have a look. You know it's just a piece of paper. But the power of story behind that money is so great, people will kill each other for it. We have an economy that demands human sacrifice. We have so much food here that we waste a quarter of it. One of the biggest problems in Western democracy is obesity. We have too much food. At the same time, there are people on this planet who are starving to death. But if we took some of our food and gave it to them, it would harm the market. Therefore, to keep the economy strong, people have to die. The economy demands human sacrifice. And we give human sacrifice to that story because of the power of it. Stories can heal you. Stories can kill you. Placebo. I give you a sugar pill. I tell you that it's medicine. If you take the pill and believe the story, 35 to 50% of you will experience a reduction in your symptoms. There was a young boy with leukemia. He imagined a Lone Ranger riding through his blood veins, shooting the cancer cells with silver bullets. Cured himself of leukemia. There was a woman. Her doctor told her she had cancer. She didn't want to have cancer. Didn't even want to think about it. She went home and watched happy movies. Any movie, as long as it had a happy ending. And she watched one after the other. 3 months later, she went back to her doctor. Cancer was gone. Stories can heal you. Stories can kill you. Nocebo, the exact opposite of placebo. I give you the same sugar pill. This time I tell you it's poison. And if you take the pill and believe the story, you're going to get sick. And you might even die. There's a young man, 26 years old, took 29 pills that he thought were antidepressants. His heart rate went down. His blood pressure went down. He required intravenous and medical intervention. And he did not recover until they told him that all he had taken were sugar pills. Stories can kill you. Story I want to talk about, it's one you've all heard. Been telling it about my people since first contact. It's the lazy, dirty, drunken Indian story. Told it throughout the colonial period. Told it to us again in residential schools. And they're still telling it today. I hear it in the media. It's toned down. I see professors writing about it, calling it free speech. And it's a powerful story. It's a nocebo story. And it's killing us. And it's not just that they tell it about us. It's that they tell it to us. And we hear it. And we believe it. Because it's been told so many times. The thing that got me off my ass to get up and start doing something about alcohol in my communities was when a young man from Larange told me that to be a real Indian, you have to drink. You're all looking at me. You have two eyes. You should see two pictures. Each of those pictures should be clear towards the center and fuzzy around the outside because you have more cones and rods closer to the center of your eye than you have in the periphery. Each of those two pictures should have a black hole in the center because you cannot see through the optic nerve that runs down the center of your retina. What your brain does is takes those two pictures, merges them together, and fills in the empty spot. You know what it fills the empty spot in with? Shit you made up. Most of what you see is socially derived. You are seeing the story that you tell yourself. If you measure the information that's entering the front of your eye and compare it to the information that your brain creates on the screen at the back of your skull, it's multiplied thousands of times. Most of what you see is what your brain is telling you is there. And that story is created by all of the stories that you've heard. I like coffee. I like really strong coffee. And I know that when I'm traveling, the best coffee is McDonald's. And I'm standing in a McDonald's and I've ordered 4 shots of espresso. And it's a strange order and it takes them some time to fill it. And I'm standing there patiently waiting. And an Aboriginal woman walked in and she saw me. And she started coming across the floor toward me. And I saw her coming. And I said, ah, shit. Here it comes. She's drunk. She's going to tell me about a sick relative on the reserve and wants $20 to get home. But as she's crossing the floor toward me, I said to myself, no matter what, you treat that woman with respect. And she came up to me. And it was probably just the braids and she needed someone to talk to. And I checked her out. Her shoes were new. She had a crease in the front of her slacks. Her blouse was new and very clean. So was her hair. Her hair was so clean it was shiny. I checked her breath. There was no alcohol on it and nothing to cover it up. But that's what my eyes showed me. My eyes showed me a dirty drunk when one wasn't there. So anybody who says they're not racist is full of shit. If you're not checking the story every time, because I have to, and I had a brown-skinned mother who loved me. The leading cause of death right now in northern Saskatchewan is injury at 24.3%. Injury is car accidents, skidoo accidents, drowning, stabbing, shootings, beatings, house fire, suicide, freezing to death. And we know that's all alcohol. And the second leading cause of death is heart disease at 23%. And we know that alcohol damages the heart. And all those guys my age who didn't shut it down and continued to binge drink are now falling over dead of heart attacks. And the third leading cause of death is cancer at 21%. And we know that alcohol causes at least 7 cancers. We know that if a woman has 1 drink a day, she increases her risk of breast cancer substantially. Add to those numbers children who don't get proper nutrition when they're young because their parents are drinking. Add to those numbers people with FASD and their shortened life expectancy because of their injury. We know alcohol is responsible for over 200 illnesses and injuries. We know that alcohol damages the immune system and people who drink too much have what's called failure to thrive. Add alcohol to diabetes. I am estimating the death rate in northern Saskatchewan right now from alcohol at 1 in 2. Every second person is going to die in alcohol-related death, whether they drink or not. In any other situation, you'd call that a crime against humanity. Here we just keep on partying. The costs are extreme. If half the deaths are related to alcohol, we can infer that half the costs of health care is related to alcohol. Health care in this province is a $5 billion budget item. I was a Crown Prosecutor for 10 years and Defense Counsel before that. And I saw that 95% of the people who came to court were intoxicated by alcohol at the time they committed their offense. So it's 95% of the cost of justice. Judges' salaries, prosecutors, legal aid, clerks, prisons, prison guards. The Lieutenant Governor of this province is a friend of mine. He used to be in F Division. And when he was in charge of F Division, Russ Morasti told me that 75% of a policeman's job is looking after drunks, with 75% of the police budget. Policing in this province is a $500 million budget item. Alcohol touches you every day. This building that we're in was built by a contractor. Contractor knew when he put in his bid, he'd pay his workers on Friday. On Monday, they wouldn't show up. And if they showed up, they'd be hungover and he'd get less work out of them. So he increased the bid accordingly. And that's true of every bit of infrastructure we have in this province. We have to engineer our roads safer because we know drunks drive on them. Every time you pay PST and GST, know that a big chunk of the money you're giving to the government is using to pay for the damages caused by alcohol. If we didn't have alcohol, how many kids would be FASD and how many special needs tutors would we need in our schools? If we didn't have alcohol, how many people would be on welfare? Like I said, touches every one of you every day. I've identified 4 models that we've used historically to deal with this problem. The one I'm the most familiar with is the enforcement model, and it doesn't work. Justice does not work. It's making the situation worse. 95% of the people who come to court were intoxicated by alcohol when they committed their offense. But justice refuses to talk about that. We've been incarcerating Aboriginal people steadily since about 1960. Before 1960, the jails were full of people from Eastern European ancestry or French. Beginning 1960, we started putting my people in jail. And the rates of incarceration have increased steadily since then. And everything that we've done has been a failure. In the 1990s, the Government of Canada changed the criminal code because they saw that there was a problem with the incarceration of Indigenous people and added Section 718(2)(e). It said that judges had to take into consideration the unique circumstances of Aboriginal people at sentencing. And nothing changed. The incarceration rates continued to climb. The Supreme Court, in a decision called Gladue, came out and the Supreme Court told the judges, you have to pay attention to the legislation, and here are the unique circumstances of Aboriginal people that you have to take consideration of. And nothing changed. The incarceration rates continued to climb. The Supreme Court came back with a decision called Ipili. And they said, hey, judges, we fucking told you, now pay attention. And nothing changed. And the incarceration rates continue to climb. And today, Saskatchewan is locking up more children and women than any other time in history. It began with residential schools. They took my people and they erased our culture. But they never gave us a new culture. Then they started putting us in jail. And in jail we got that new culture, jailhouse culture. We learn in jail that the institution is going to feed you, it's going to give you a roof and a bed. We learn to disrespect authority. We learn that violence solves problems. We learn to take immediate offense at the slightest insult. If you're in a Canadian penal institution and someone calls you a goof, you have to fight immediately, or people will know that you're weak and you will be bullied hence. I come from a Cree culture. In my culture, we love to tease. So it makes you strong. You can't tease anymore. You tease the wrong person, you're going to get yourself stabbed. And that's what justice has done. It's replaced our culture with jailhouse culture through incarceration and increasing rates of incarceration. And our youth today no longer believe that there's any such thing as a traditional culture. And we believe that jailhouse culture is Indigenous culture. And we're making it worse. 20 years as a lawyer, defense counsel, and as a prosecutor, dealing primarily with criminal law, and I never saw a criminal. I saw people who got drunk and did something stupid, up to and including committing an atrocity. I've only ever prosecuted one man who was sober when he committed murder. I have never prosecuted a single sex assault that did not involve alcohol. Alcohol today is your #1 date rape drug. And justice isn't fixing it. Deterrence does not work. I knew as a prosecutor that if I got this man sentenced to a correctional center, he was going to come back to the community angry. And I knew that if I asked the judge to send him to a penitentiary, to a federal institution, he was going to return to his community angry and mean. I helped to fill the jails full of Aboriginal people. Harper apologized to Aboriginal people for residential schools. Trudeau apologized to Inuit people for their treatment. And someday a Prime Minister of Canada is going to stand up and apologize for what I did in filling the jails full of Indians. Trying to take responsibility for that. The second model that I identified is the medical model. It's a bit better than the enforcement model, but historically not by much. Like I said, 95% of the people who came to court were intoxicated by alcohol when they committed their offense. Of that group, about 15 to 20% were what I call obsessive compulsive drinkers. People who were drinking and could not or would not stop. They weren't the problem. When you're in that state, you spend all of your time and resources trying to get a bottle. Once you have a bottle, you want to go someplace safe to drink it where nobody will take it away from you. And they appear in court when somebody beat them up and took their bottle or had sex with them when they were passed out. Most of the people who come to court, 80 to 85%, just got drunk and did something stupid. The medical model only deals with that 15 to 20%, that obsessive compulsive group. And historically, we've sent people to treatment centers to a 28-day program. You know why 28 days? Nothing magic about 28 days. When they first identified alcoholism as a disability, insurance companies had to pay for treatment. And they refused to pay for anything more than a 28-day program. So everybody made their programs 28 days. The success rates of those programs are between 2 and 5%. 2% for the treatment centers we send my people to. 5% if you've got thousands of dollars a week and you can go to Vancouver. But 2% or 5% or 15 to 20% isn't much, but it's better than the justice model. We're improving that. We did a training in L'Orange and we brought out the doctors and we trained them in pharmacological interventions and brief medical interventions. Brief interventions are really simple. 8 to 12 brief interventions are equal to 28-day treatment program. And a brief intervention is simply saying, sister, I see you struggling. I know you got a problem and I care. There are resources in the community to help you. That's about as long as it takes. Just a little empathy. Just give a shit a little bit. Pharmacological interventions. There are 2 drugs. We've lobbied and got the Saskatchewan government to change the formulary, and now they are covered by Saskatchewan, naltrexone and acamprosate. They're opiate blockers. They take the craving away. If you're one of those people who can't go out on Friday night and have a couple of drinks, you have to drink everything in the house, consider naltrexone. Take it an hour before you go drinking. You go out, you have 1, 2, maybe 3, then you just don't feel like it anymore. Acamprosate's the same thing, but it's used by people who want to be completely abstinent. There's an injectable form of naltrexone that's not available in Canada, but we're working on it. We're seeing successes in L'Orange. Next month, we're going to be training the doctors in La Loche and Beauval. We need to change the medical schools so that doctors get this training. It's getting better. But I'll tell you a little story that exemplifies the difference between the enforcement model and the medical model. I had this guy in L'Orange. He was showing up in court all of the time, one of the street people. And I tell the judge, don't put him on conditions. He can't keep them. He'll just breach and you'll have to send him to jail eventually. So just send him to jail now. Give him a short jail sentence, 2 weeks, a month. He'll go sober up, he'll be okay. And because I treated him fair in the courtroom, he talked to me on the street. And he came up to me and he said, I went to detox. I'm on my way to treatment. And that was pretty good. But a month and a half later, I see him in front of the post office and he comes to talk to me. And he says, "Can you send me to jail?" And no, sorry, buddy, you have to do something wrong. What's going on? He'd been to treatment and he got out that day. And as soon as he got back to Laurent, he got back in with his buddies, started drinking again, and he knew he was going to die. And the only way he could see to stay alive was if Harold Johnson sent him to jail. And I couldn't. Luckily, we trained our doctors, and the doctors hot-spotted him. Got a social worker to work with him, got him some mental health counseling, got him an apartment, and a prescription for naltrexone. In the year before they hot-spotted him, this man had spent 191 days in jail. Most of those were overnight. He had 82 visits to emergency. After they hot-spotted him, he never spent another night in jail, and he only had to go back to emergency twice. And this is a man who seriously damaged his body by decades and decades of drinking. So our ways of dealing with this did work. The third model, and this one's really hard. I have to go to my own communities, talk to my own relatives about the victim model. The victim model says that Aboriginal people drink because of colonization, because of poverty, because of residential schools, because of failed government policies, because of unemployment. Residential schools was a bitch. Colonization was hard. And we can't get stuck there. We can't be victims. That's a nocebo story. It's going to kill us. I have to go into my own communities and talk to my relatives and my friends and ask hard questions. Do we drink because we're poor? Or are we poor because we drink? Do we drink because we don't have a job? Or do we not have a job because we drink? Do we drink because our communities are all messed up? Or did we fuck up our communities with our drinking? And those are hard questions. But somebody trained me to be a lawyer, and I know that questions are more powerful than statements, so I just leave it there. That victim story is wrong. We are not victims. We are doctors. We're lawyers. We're judges. We're architects and engineers. We're school teachers and social workers. We're heavy equipment operators and plumbers and firefighters, carpenters. And we're bootleggers. We're lots of things. We're not victims. We can't get stuck there. I can't fix colonization. I can't fix residential schools. That story, that lazy, dirty, drunken Indian story, that's a lie too. There are twice as many Aboriginal people who are completely abstinent than the Canadian population. 35% of Aboriginal people in Canada do not drink at all, compared to 18% of Canadians. Yet the story says we're the lazy, dirty drunks. And like I said, it's a nocebo story. It's killing us. The fourth model is the trauma model. Trauma is real. All of those people that I prosecuted hurt somebody. We're hurting our own. We have high crime rates. All of the victims are Aboriginal people. mostly women. We began to learn about PTSD after the Vietnam War. There's a case study called Tom, or a case study that Tom is the person's name, not his real name. Tom was in Vietnam. His platoon got ambushed and all his buddies got killed in a rice paddy. 30 years later, that's not what Tom wants to talk about with this psychologist. He wants to talk about what happened the next day when he went into a Vietnamese village and he killed unarmed villagers and he raped a woman. The atrocity that he committed traumatized him more than the atrocity committed against him. So we got this woman, northern community, her and her boyfriend are having a drink. They're not drunk, they just had a couple of beer. They're sharing a cigarette. She has it in her mouth. He reaches over and takes it out of her mouth before she's ready and triggers whatever trauma she has. And her fight, flight, or freeze instinct kicks in without her thinking about it. The next thing she remembers is she's outside and she gave the knife to her aunt. She'd stabbed her boyfriend 7 times. Didn't kill him. So got these traumatized people committing atrocities, traumatizing themselves more. Then we run them through the justice system. We bring them in and run them through a preliminary hearing, and we traumatize them again. Then we run them through a trial, and we really traumatize them. And then we send them to jail. And we know that in jail they're going to be seriously traumatized. Then we release them back into the community and ask them if they learned their lesson. If you're experiencing trauma, you're stuck in fight, flight, or freeze all the time. You have anxiety levels of 8, 9, or 10. If you're a businessman in Regina, you got a stressful job, you might have an anxiety level of 3. You go out on Friday and you have a couple of drinks and your anxiety goes down to 0. If you're traumatized, like I said, you have anxiety levels of 7, 8, 9, and it's there all the time. You wake up in the middle of the night and it's still there. You go out on Friday and you have a few drinks and your levels go down to 3 or 4. And that feels pretty good. That's what you think normal people feel like. You want to be there all the time. Alcohol is excellent medicine for PTSD. It alleviates all of the symptoms, problems in the side effects. You quickly develop a tolerance for it and requires more and more. And the more alcohol you pour into a community, the more violence, the more neglect, the more horror. Tell you a story. Young man, northern community. He's in a relationship. He's too young. Doesn't know how relationships work. Add alcohol. Him and his girlfriend walk out of the community late at night, down the highway, got a bottle. They're standing on a bridge, having a lover's quarrel. She jumps in front of a semi to prove that she's serious. Commits suicide in front of him. He stays with the body for 3 hours till the police and ambulance arrive. He's traumatized. He's having feelings. He's having thoughts. Things he can't describe. Things he doesn't understand. He goes to somebody older, somebody wiser, looking for advice. He goes to his auntie, tells her about these feelings and thoughts that he's having. And her advice is, Go and get drunk and forget about it. So he does. Gets drunk, stays drunk. One morning, beautiful July morning, sleeping in his car. Police are knocking on the window. Sometime during the night, he's driving around drunk, ran over his cousin, killed his cousin, found his cousin's DNA underneath his car. More trauma, more grief, more reason to drink. And we've got this wheel of trauma and grief and drinking and trauma and grief and drinking and trauma and grief and drinking, and it's rolling over top of us. And it's destroying us. And the only spoke in that wheel that I can see to knock out is the alcohol spoke. Because that's just a damn story. We can fix this. We know how. A little better than 3 years ago, I was still working as a prosecutor, beginning to recognize that I am helping to make things worse. And I'm twisting and turning, trying to figure my way out of this, and knowing that I have to do something. We're flying up to Wollaston, and the Deputy Minister of Corrections is on the plane, a man named Dale McPhee. And he wanted to see what was happening on the ground. So he flew up with us, and he spent the day with a probation officer. Court in the north is usually a community hall or a band hall, and we hold court at the front of the room. And at the back of the room, there's a table with a probation officer, and people who are on probation have to report to their probation officer that day. We were flying out of Wollaston. Dale McPhee said, "Harold, 45 people reported to probations today. 44 of them said they had a problem with alcohol. The 45th was a 12-year-old boy with FASD. What are we going to do?" I explained to him in about 10 minutes how we have to change the story we tell ourselves about alcohol. When I finished, he said, "What can government do to help?" And my big mouth answered before my brain, and I said, "Give me a 6-month leave of absence and I'll show you." I got the leave of absence. I seconded to the Northern Alcohol Strategy. My wife, Joan, who was a special needs probation officer, all of her clients had been FASD or had mental health issues or low cognitive functioning or schizophrenia. And a woman named Carla Frohag, who was director of probations. And the three of us formed a Northern Alcohol Strategy, and for the first 2 years we didn't have to report to anybody. We were free to work. It was excellent labor experiment here when you turn 3 people who give a shit loose. What we were able to do. First thing we did was went to Lac La Ronge Indian Band and asked for their endorsement. And got it. Went to the town of La Ronge, to the mayor and council, and they endorsed our work. And the village of Arange. And then we went to the people. And we asked the people, what can we do? First, we tried to hold community meetings. But every time we held a meeting and booked a hall, we had to cancel because they needed it for a funeral or a wake. And sadly, many of those funerals were for people who drank themselves to death. And when we were able to hold community meetings, we found that the majority of people who showed up were people who were being paid to be there. And we wanted to talk to the people. So I stood in the welfare line and pulled people out of the line while they were waiting to get their check, talked to them. I went to court and I grabbed people who were waiting to talk to the judge and we interviewed them. I went door to door. We talked to the Chamber of Commerce. We talked to everybody we could talk to. Gave a presentation to the doctors on a Tuesday after a long weekend from hell for them. The emergency had been packed. There were people passed out on the floor. Doctors were tripping over people in the hallways. People were becoming more intoxicated because they were stealing the hand sanitizer and drinking it. So when we showed up, the doctors were ready to listen, and they became our greatest advocates and supporters, especially Dr. James Irvine, who was a public health officer. And we formed allies everywhere we could go. Talked to everybody and anybody. We went to the churches. I gave the Sunday sermon at the United Church. I went home right after and had a sweat, but I did give the Sunday sermon. And that's how you change the story. You get everybody involved. You get everybody talking. The town changed the bylaws around the hours that alcohol sales could occur in the community. Previously, off sales were available till 3 a.m., but taxis shut down at 1. They changed that back to midnight. Gave people a little bit of reprieve by slowing down sales on Sundays. And like I said, Dr. James Irvine is one of our greatest supporters. He may as well be on the Northern Alcohol Strategy team because he's done so much work. And when we were just getting started, he said, you need a baseline. And we said, yeah, okay. And we just kept working. And finally he said, no, you need a baseline. And yeah. And he said, you need a baseline. Okay, what's that? He got special permission to do a study in the emergency room in L'Orange for the month of October 2016. And every person who came to emergency that month, a form was filled out, didn't have anybody's name on it. It just said what they were in emergency for and whether alcohol was involved. And we took that data by the day and put it on a chart for the entire month. And we could see the peaks and valleys all across the month. And we noticed all of the peaks lined up with paydays, family allowance, child tax credit, pension days. So we went to the RCMP and asked for their calls for service related to alcohol by the day. And we overlaid that data, and guess what? All the peaks and valleys lined up. Then we went to Saskatchewan Liquor and Gaming Authority and asked for their data. And they said, we'll only give it to you by the week. But by then we had allies in government and we got it by the day. And guess what? All across the month, it all lines up. Alcohol sales, police calls for service, and emergency room visits all match up. Then we went to the schools and we asked for the truancy numbers. And we learned something. The kids stop going to school a day before the checks come in because they see the shit coming. We did 2016, 2017. We missed 2018. We're kind of busy. Managed to get it done this spring, March 2019. Did it again. 3 years of work. 3 years of the community having a really hard conversation. Alcohol sales are down. Police calls for service are down. Crime is down. Emergency room visits related to alcohol are down by 19%. We can change the story. We can fix it. Now the Northern Alcohol Strategy is looking like it's going to become a provincial strategy. How can you help? When you go home today, don't be silent. It's okay. You can talk about it. And please do. Please talk about it. Anywhere you can. Because that's how you change the story. Make allies. Make friends. Work together. Get along. That's how we fix it. Thank you for your time. Thank you for your attention. Thank you for taking time out of your day to come here tonight. Hi, Gargano Kumari, all my relations.
We would invite a few questions and comments. Anyone have any questions or comments for?
Okay. Today. Peace and Good Order talks about the over-incarceration of Aboriginal people. After the Colton Bushy decision, McClelland and Stewart reached out to me and asked me to write them a book. Took a month and a half. Dumped a whole bunch of things onto my computer and sent it to them. And since then we've worked it out and we've got a pretty nice book that's very personal. It talks about me and my experience in the justice system and over incarceration. Take a big swipe at law school and the complete failure of that system.
Harold, how do you reconcile the attempts to reduce the alcohol use in the general population with the rate of advertising, the rate of sponsorships, the rate of privatization of liquor stores right across Canada?
I don't. It's a fight. The target most recently has been women. The industry recognized that women weren't drinking as much as men. So they created a whole bunch of drinks targeting women. All of those alco pops, the fancy drinks, that's the industry's deliberate attack on women. And unless we educate ourselves and recognize what's going on, the alcohol industry, the tobacco industry, all of them are going to continue to prey on you.
Yes.
Mr. Kowalchuk. The government is not making money off the alcohol. Very conservative numbers show that they're spending 3 times as much as they take in. And those are very conservative. Government knows this because I've told them. But government doesn't think long term. Government only thinks until the next election. And they start thinking about the next election as soon as they're elected. And who they can convince to vote for them. And Ontario voted for $1 beer. You need an educated populace to educate the government. All of the evidence shows that if you reduce availability and increase prices, harms go down. One study out of the United States showed that a 1% increase in alcohol prices reduced domestic violence by 3%. That's the evidence, and it's clear, and it's everywhere, and all of the researchers keep putting out this data over and over and over again, and governments ignore them. Because governments don't have to be evidence-based. Governments are popularity-based. Two things. Those treatment centers don't work. Stop sending people there. Montreal Lake created Camp Hope, land-based healing. And they brought in a friend of mine who takes people out onto the land and teaches people how to live on the land. And he told me about coming back at the end of the day, Aboriginal people, and they were crying because they were Indians, but they'd never set a snare before. They'd never set a fish net. And they were being reintroduced to it. They're getting a sense of their own identity. Plus the land is healing. If you're in northern Saskatchewan and you say land and healing in the same sentence, you don't have to explain it. Everybody knows what you're talking about. And we take that land-based healing and couple it with Western trauma counseling. Joyce Knight worked there, and so Camp Hope had a 72% success rate. So that works. What we need to do is stop using treatment centers of any kind and turn our communities into treatment centers. So in Firewater, I talk about an idea called Sober House. And it's a simple idea. You just put a sign on your door or your window that says Sober House. And people who come back from treatment to, like you said, get back into the same community, the same family, the same friends, the same situation, often don't have a safe place to be, don't have a sober place to be. So if they're walking down the street and they see a sign on somebody's window that says Sober House, they know that they can go there and have a cup of coffee or a cup of tea and play some crib maybe. Someplace sober, safe to be for a while. And I just wrote it in the book. Westmore High School in Prince Albert, the West Flat High School, picked up on that idea. They asked my permission, and of course I gave it. And they created the Sober House Project. They designed the sign. It's beautiful. It's an eagle head. It says Sober House. And these 4 youth went to City Council in Prince Albert and asked City Council to endorse them, and got a unanimous endorsement. And a documentary was made about them on CBC. And some treatment centers learned about it and borrowed the idea, and now hand out the Sober House signs to their clientele as they leave treatment. And Nietzsche Institute found out about it, and Nietzsche Institute picked it up, and they're going to be teaching it to their counselors and treatment people. And they've identified Fort Chipewyan in northern Alberta as the first community that they're going to work in. And I was just at a ceremony where a reconciliation officer for Calgary came to Westmore School, and in ceremony got the idea from them, got the project from them, and he's taking it back to Calgary. We're going to turn our communities into treatment centers. That's the solution.
One last question.
L'Orange doctors recognize that they have a group of people who are coming to emergency repeatedly. And they just pick one and work with that person intensively. Social workers, addiction counselors, doctors, everybody gets together and focuses on this one person. And they've hotspotted several. And they are making a huge difference.
Well, I want to thank, on behalf of the Faculty of Arts and all of us here, thank you, Harold, for your teaching and your stories. You taught us that everything is story, and as you were using story to illustrate your points so memorably, we learned about your story, and it's a very powerful one, and we won't forget it. So thank you so much.
Thank you, I'm humbled. I was coming to the podium to do a little self-promotion and was met with that. Thank you very much. The self-promotion is that there's books at the back of the room for sale, and I'm going to be hanging around, and I'll sign them for you if you leave. Thank you.